So, Bitcoin and energy. It's quite common, and even I thought this as well, that Bitcoin's energy usage is due to its inability to process transactions efficiently. But that's incorrect. You could process all of Bitcoin's transactions all the way back to Genesis on a Raspberry Pi computer. In fact, you can process all the transactions in real time on the Raspberry Pi computer. We call them Bitcoin nodes. They're important to ensure that the consensus rules within the network are maintained. So the vast amounts of energy usage within Bitcoin is not to process transactions. It's actually to build a defensive wall of energy. And this wall of energy is required to protect the property rights of its users. Okay? So it's actually a wall of energy, an encrypted wall of energy. It's nothing to do with the processing of the transactions. It's everything to do with protecting the users from hackers, from thieves, from scammers, even protection from the environment. Bitcoin doesn't corrode. It doesn't get affected by flooding. This wall of energy ensures that the user's rights, the property rights, are protected. So we know that energy secures the network by creating this encrypted wall of energy. And so it requires real-world resources, so electricity and compute. And this imposes a significant opportunity cost to those who wish to attack the network. And so because it's incredibly expensive to attack Bitcoin, it makes more sense that if you've got those resources to even think about attacking it, you might as well use those resources in favor of Bitcoin and then get paid in Bitcoin and earn a profit. And so there's a profit motive to cooperate with the network as opposed to corrupting it. So it's unlikely an individual, or an economic rational individual or company would bother to try and break the network. They're more likely to cooperate with the network and contribute to the wall of energy. Governments may have a non-economic incentive to attack it, but they're going to have to redirect a lot of resources, money, infrastructure away from solving other problems just to purely attack Bitcoin. This wouldn't go down well with the electorate, especially as they could make a profit by mining the Bitcoin. Another important point is the energy is decentralized. Okay, so it's effectively not monopolized because energy it's found all over the world, and so you'll have mining units placed all over the world. So that contributes to the decentralized nature of Bitcoin. So the security isn't in any one place. And more so, the cheapest energy can be found in some of the most remote places of the world because that's where nobody is. So that's even more secure because the infrastructure protecting Bitcoin is in remote areas, very distant, in very distant locations to our other parts of society. Because you have high costs in terms of building this encrypted wall of energy, in terms of paying for the electricity and the compute and the maintenance, that you actually are forced to sell the Bitcoin that you earn. So this means that the miners distribute the Bitcoin among the users, therefore reducing centralization risk of the Bitcoin asset itself. And it's important to note that the Bitcoin mining consensus mechanism disconnects ownership of Bitcoin from control over the network. So just because you may have a lot of Bitcoin doesn't mean that you have the ability to, say, control the network or make it any less secure. In the rich West, we have real estate as our primary store of wealth vehicle. And we do that because we want to protect against monetary debasement, but also we can do that because we have secure or strong property rights. We have generally effective and low corrupt politicians, lawyers, police, and the military. But importantly, this all takes vast amounts of energy. It's channeled energy through a culture that can achieve this, but nonetheless, it does require energy in order to have strong property rights. What Bitcoin does is takes this in its most pure form, energy, and protects itself with it. Bitcoin doesn't have access to lawyers, police, and military, but it does have access to pure energy, pure encrypted energy. And that is what it takes from the current system and protects itself. So I mentioned it's encrypted energy, and that's because the energy is being pumped through specialized computers called ASICs, and they are creating 711 exahash per second of computing power. And to give you a sense of the scale of that, you could point all of the world's cloud computing infrastructure towards Bitcoin and attack it, and you wouldn't make a dent. So there's currently 20 gigawatts of electrical power backing the network, and that's being pumped through the computing power to produce 711 exahash per second. So to sense the scale of the amount of energy that is the equivalent of the amount of energy that the US Navy can currently project at any given moment. There's also some economic power protecting Bitcoin. $1.3 trillion has been invested, and 100 million hodlers are protecting Bitcoin in a political aspect. But typically, it's the encrypted energy that's the most important thing that's securing the Bitcoin. People sometimes have concerns about that amount of energy being pumped through the Bitcoin network, but their concerns really lie in where the energy comes from. Okay, if the energy comes from oil, coal, or gas, then yeah, we've got a concern. But if it's coming from green renewable energies, then this isn't a problem. So we really have to detach the idea that energy consumption is bad from energy production. Okay, so if you've got a concern with Bitcoin consuming energy, surely you've got a concern with theme parks, Teslas, fairy lights. And if you still have a concern about Bitcoin using energy compared to those, it's probably because you don't understand the value that Bitcoin brings, which in case you probably want to continue watching this or rewatch it from the start. Because Bitcoin does offer a lot of value. And also we've got to think that if we're going to be a sufficiently advanced civilization, we're going to be consuming a lot more energy than we are today. We just have to do it in a renewable fashion. Ideally, where we would consume as much energy as the sun produces. That's how we would become a Type 1 and Type 2 Kardashev scale civilization. It is quite well known that generally the wealthier countries, the countries with the least poverty, consume the most energy. So energy consumption isn't a bad thing. It's where it's produced is the bad thing. Just as perspective, Bitcoin's share of global energy consumption is 0.26%. That's perhaps the thickness of this line in this pie chart. It produces a little more energy than gold, but it has far less environmental consequences. And Bitcoin really consumes a little bit less energy than, say, data centers or data networks, more sort of equivalent to copper mining. And there's actually 12 times less energy consumption than the banking sector. So if you're going to criticize Bitcoin's energy, you have to take a look at the current financial system as well. Bitcoin ranks just behind South Africa in terms of its consumption, and it has approximately the same number of users as Vietnam. Okay, to understand why, again, even further, why this isn't a bad thing, and actually Bitcoin's energy consumption is trending in a really positive way, is you have to understand the economics of Bitcoin mining, or this is the process of building that energy wall. Okay, so Bitcoin mining is a commoditized industry, and so what that means is that they cannot set the price. They're price takers. The market sets the price of the amount of revenue that Bitcoin miners will receive from mining Bitcoin, and that's it. They have no control. They cannot. It's not like Apple, where they can set Apple, the company, where they can set the price of a laptop or an iPhone, because they are certainly not a commoditized industry. Bitcoin mining is, and so this is what makes it a very difficult industry to actually operate in. And so if you're in a situation where you're a commoditized industry and you're price takers in terms of revenue, the only two things you can actually do to increase your profit is to lower your costs. And you can do that by upgrading your equipment, but that only gets you so far, and there's also more upfront capital costs to do that, so you have to do the math on that one. But also the best thing really is to find cheaper energy. So if you find cheap energy, you can increase your profit. And the cheapest energy is actually found away from where the average retail consumer is, which is in the cities. And cheaper energy is typically is found at the source of energy production, where the demand typically isn't. And the unfortunate thing for Bitcoin miners is, if they manage to find cheaper energy, given enough time because of the issuance schedule of Bitcoin, the revenue tends to come down as well over time. And so they have to consistently upgrade equipment and find cheaper energy in order to stay profitable. It's this constant war between a reducing revenue and trying to lower their costs so they can make a profit. Eventually it'll stabilize, but at the moment the trend is that revenue is going down, but also the costs are coming down too, as they find more in a cheaper, abundant energy that's not being utilized, and the equipment of the mining equipment is improving and becoming more efficient over time. So like I said, the cheaper energy is where it's not being used by consumers, and the good thing is that there's a lot of this energy in the world. There's actually a lot of waste. Just in the US alone, there is 206 terawatt hours of electricity that's being wasted. So this could power the Bitcoin network 1.2 times. Global gas flaring recovery potential could power the entire Bitcoin network 4 times. That's literally wasted energy that no one uses when you're trying to extract oil from the ground, which we'll talk about a little bit later. To give you further insight about how much wasted energy there is, this is in the US. Actually, 67% of energy produced is wasted or stranded, and only 33% is utilized. If we zoom in on just the electrical component, 35% is utilized and 65% of energy is wasted or stranded. Now, this isn't because of incompetence, or this is just economics. Where the electricity is being generated, there's not enough demand. And the demand for electricity isn't happening constantly. It comes in waves. And if you don't use electricity when it's generated, you lose it. It's like a flowing, it just flows. And if you don't use it, it has to be earthed. It's just wasted. You can't store it. We don't have the batteries at scale to be able to store that energy. So electricity is you use it or lose it. And most of the time we lose it. So this is where a good chunk of Bitcoin mining is being carried out. And this is why it shouldn't be such a concern when you see the amount of energy that the amount of energy that's being pumped into the Bitcoin network, because a lot of it wasn't going to be used by anyone anyway. So to help you visualize this, I have power here on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, and this pink here is the energy demand, and it comes in cycles, right? So peaks, at night when people are using their energy, and then in the day when they're at work or when they're sleeping, there's a trough and they're not using the energy. But we need energy to be supplied at a level that will meet the demand, because if it doesn't, that's when you get if your demand peaks over the available supply, that's when you get brownouts or blackouts. Okay, so you have to have more supply running than demand, and then that energy is wasted. Okay, but if you plug a Bitcoin miner to these energy generators, that can be a great tool to suck up any of the wasted energy and make use of that. Okay, turn that wasted energy literally into money. Okay, and the good thing about Bitcoin miners is that they are a continuous demand application for this wasted energy. They are very flexible in location because they're quite nimble and mobile, these Bitcoin miners, and they are very flexible in their demand response. So they can be switched off and on whenever needed without affecting the network, because it's sufficiently decentralized. So this leads to a more stable grid, and it actually lowers energy prices for consumers. You will be able to increase the power surplus here without increasing costs. So this leads to a more efficient grid. Another way of putting it is through, with AC generators, they have a frequency that they need to maintain that's, in this case, around 50 hertz. if you have shocks to the system where you have increases in consumers demanding electricity, then it can lower the frequency and thus affect some of the infrastructure. The infrastructure can be affected by these shocks of frequency. Same thing if there's a shock in terms of a lack of demand, you can lead to a high increase of frequency. Again, this can disrupt infrastructure if it's not. That's why having a balanced grid is super important. Bitcoin can do this, can offer a solution to be turned on. Bitcoin miners can be turned on to consume electricity if there are a drop in consumption, and turned off when there's a dramatic increase in consumption, thus creating a more balanced grid. And how Bitcoin, to understand the economics, how Bitcoin can sort of reduce the costs for consumers. At the moment, without a Bitcoin miner, 100% of the costs of this energy generation is paid by the consumers, even though they're not using all of the energy that is being created by the energy generator. But if you were to use Bitcoin mining in this case, as an example, 30% of the costs will be paid by the Bitcoiner, so therefore only 70% of the costs will be applied to the consumer. So you're sharing the costs of the infrastructure to be built because you have continuous demand. There is more demand paying for that infrastructure. And this isn't just theoretical, this is actually happening around the world. So geothermal data centers are happening in Iceland, volcano data center in El Salvador, solar power data centers in the USA, hydropower data center in Paraguay, wind power data center in Latvia. And then now there's publications coming out noticing this, that the market is seeing Bitcoin as a great tool to help reduce the costs of energy generation. But more importantly, it's if you have access to geothermal or hydro power and you're not using it at all, Bitcoin mining incentivizes you to go out and build infrastructure to generate electricity from those sources because it's literally free money. If you have volcanoes in your backyard, you might as well tap a Bitcoin miner and use that geothermal energy. It's just getting wasted anyway. The heat is leaving the planet, leaving the earth. You might as well capture that and turn that into some money. So in a way, if you have geothermal or hydro, it's effectively like having gold. Now, Bitcoin enables you to profit off of those natural resources. So what is the big idea? Bitcoin literally creates a wall of energy around its users to protect their property rights. Bitcoin mining enables you to capitalize off natural resources like geothermal or hydro and actually subsidize the build out of these energy generators. And it can balance the grid, thus making it more efficient and lower cost.